So, what you need to do is beat 2 eggs in a large bowl with a hand beater until they are fluffy. Add 2 cups of flour, 1 3/4 of a cup of milk, half a cup of vegetable oil, 1 tablespoon of sugar, 4 teaspoons of baking powder, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, half a spoon of vanilla, and stir until it's smooth. Then pour the mix into a hot waffle iron. Cook until it's golden brown and serve hot. Now, this has absolutely nothing to do with this episode, but this is a recipe for some damn good waffles. Hi, I am Pavel and welcome to the North of Rapture podcast. This series is all about communication with clients from a designer's perspective. There are quite a few things that people dread when talking about client communication. The chief ones, of course, are irrational ideas, clients with short tempers, and a language barrier. But the most common thing people mentioned is talking to new or potential clients. For the longest time, I couldn't really figure out why people felt so strongly about it. I mean, I get some of it, the fear of unknown and whatnot. But I didn't realize the full extent of it until I conducted some workshops on client communication and got some pretty interesting examples from people. And by conducting workshops, I mean I talked for 45 minutes and people looked at me weird. And by examples, I mean one dude said it. What more do you need? The reason why at least some people are anxious about their first contact with clients is that they feel a lot of pressure not to present the company they are working for in a negative light. And it's understandable. But to be fair, while I could list a few reasons to fear those first encounters, this one never really occurred to me. That statement from one of the members of my hanged over audience took me by surprise, and I didn't really have a decent answer for him on how to overcome that problem, because I never had it. But now, at least I know why. You see, I started out as a freelancer, so looking for clients and having those first conversations was an everyday occurrence to me. Well, okay, it was a bi-weekly occurrence. The business back then was kinda slow. Anyway, that being such an integral part of my work made it somewhat mundane and relieved me of any fears I might have now. But people who didn't start their career freelancing or worked in an agency where they weren't involved in acquiring clients were simply deprived of the experience. By the way, don't start your career freelancing. I'll have a whole episode on why I think that's a horrible idea. Moving on. The uncomfortable truth is, you might mess up your first few attempts. You're gonna say something stupid, or you're gonna forget to ask the important questions, or you're gonna call your client your ex-client's name. It's a natural process of learning. You'll make mistakes before you'll become proficient in something. The trick is not worrying about those mistakes too much and learning from them. Each consecutive attempt will be better. Unless you really are paralyzed by the very prospect of taking on the responsibility of bringing new business to your company, even if that responsibility isn't solely on you. But in that case, there's very little I can do for you. And don't think that you'll stop being nervous with enough practice. There's always some stage fright. It helps to remain focused. But there's a difference between some motivating stress and, sheer terror. If you keep feeling the latter, well, there's also the possibility that you're not cut out to be on the front line, and that's fine too. Now, I don't want you to think there's absolutely nothing to it. I wouldn't recommend jumping into an introductory call without any preparation. That would actually be asking for trouble. But no worries, there are a few ways to get a head start. Whether you're starting off an email, or your company has a business development team that filters through leads, your first job will be to do research about the person who contacted you and their company. Now, I can't stress enough how important thorough research is before those first conversations. But here is a list of a few things that you might check. You'll want to know what the company is doing. Do they have an established position on the market? Do they have a website? And if so, what are their latest blog posts and news pieces? Do they have any products out? What industry they operate in? How many employees they might have? What is their country of origin? What could be their annual revenue? Do they like ponies? What's their CEO's favorite ice cream? You know, the basic stuff. And once you have a good grasp on what their business is about, check out the person you're scheduled to talk to, their job at the company especially. You'll be dealing differently with a CEO, differently with someone from marketing, and differently with a developer or a project manager. Check out their LinkedIn profile or their Twitter feed if they have one, see if they gave any talks or interviews. You can get a decent idea what their demeanor is from that. And if someone else from your company already talked to them, check what their impressions are. So be a bit of a stalker, but go into that meeting with as much information as you can gather. My general rule of thumb is that I want to spend more time on the research than I imagine the conversation will last. There's not a ratio to it or anything, but if you spend 15 minutes doing research for a meeting that's scheduled to take an hour, you'll probably go into that meeting without enough background knowledge. Well, that's one of the things that brings me to my next point. Remember, before the client signs a contract with you, nobody is making any money. So do everyone a favor and don't waste anyone's time. Because time is money, blah blah blah. Keep the conversation brief and on point. Ask only those questions that are required for the next step. So if the client asks you to do an estimate for them based on the scope that you're discussing, don't ask them at this point about stuff that's irrelevant to the task at hand. Target platforms and functionality are important for the scope and in turn for the estimation. In-depth details about the target audience and main business strategy probably aren't, regardless of how interesting those might be. Just bear in mind that if the client is volunteering that kind of information on their own accord, don't stop them. First of all, that would be rude. And second of all, that would be rude. But seriously, if the client is eager enough to present the whole history of their company, let them. That will not only show that you're attentive and interested in them and their business, but also it's a first step to building a good relationship. If your potential client likes to talk, don't discourage them. I know this is somewhat counterintuitive in terms of what I just said about not wasting time, but if you do interrupt a person who's about to tell you that the idea for the company name came from their grandfather on the mother's side, who fought in the Second World War in France, where he found an orphaned puppy which he had to smuggle back to the US in his backpack and which he named Jim after a friend he lost during Operation Cobra, and that's why the company is called ViperTech, well, then you've probably offended the person and greatly decreased the chance of working with them. With a bit of practice, you'll be able to recognize the type of person you're talking to and will change your approach to the meeting accordingly. Now, there are a few ways you can lower the chance of having an unnecessarily long and unproductive meeting. First of all, schedule the meeting for a specific amount of time, say 30 minutes. Second, carefully choose your words when asking questions. Use adjectives that emphasize either the relative haste of the meeting or ones that give a clear indication of what kind of information you're looking for. Don't ask, "Can you tell me about your company?" and instead ask, "Can you give me a brief overview of what your company does?" The phrase brief overview already indicates that you're looking for very specific information, not the whole history. Again, don't ask, "Can you describe your project to me?" Ask, "What is the core idea behind your project?" Same rule applies. I find it that it's better to ask follow-up questions to get more but very specific and useful info than try to distill it from a 15-minute essay. However, whatever you do, never say you're in a hurry or that you have another meeting scheduled soon, so you need to keep this one brief. You need to give the person you're talking to your undivided attention. If the meeting was scheduled for, say, 30 minutes and you're only halfway there at the 30-minute mark, stay as long as it's necessary. Never give your potential client the idea that you have something better to do than to talk to them, even if you actually do. Unless, you have to pick up your kid from school or have a kidney transplant. I think clients would be understanding in that situation. But then again, what the hell were you thinking scheduling a call for that hour? Anyway, long story short, it's your job to be efficient, not your client's. There are also two things that, at least in my opinion, you should never do during those first calls. Don't estimate and don't negotiate. Shut down any questions regarding timeframes and budgets. Never calculate anything without all the necessary information and without proper preparation. If the client does ask you about how long something will take or how much it's gonna cost, tell them you don't know and that you're gonna get back to them. because otherwise you'll just be guessing. It's not prudent to provide answers about money or time with the client looming over you. You'll probably want to come up with an attractive offer, pique the client interest, and you'll end up screwing yourself over. Same goes for negotiating. I'd be very reluctant to negotiate anything during a call or a meeting, especially the first one, unless you're a very business-savvy person that will not fall to the pressures of such situations. I'm definitely not one of those, so I prefer to do it via email. It's safer and gives you more time to think things through. Of course, if you're working in an agency or a software house, there's going to be someone else taking care of the financial aspects, but you might still end up negotiating deadlines and such. One more thing I need to mention. If the client defines the scope and gives you their expected deadline for the project that's clearly unattainable, communicate that right away. You can ask, of course, if the deadline can be moved, but don't even go into the estimation process knowing full well that it's going to be impossible to complete the project on time. Oh, and another thing. Don't go promising anything during the meeting that you're not 100% sure you can keep. Like Monica from Friends, we sometimes have this uncontrollable need to please people, and that gets us in trouble. Now last but not least, let's talk about that pesky fear of screwing up. And I don't have a straight answer for you on how to overcome that. The truth is, I don't think there's any clever advice or trick that I can sell you. Fundamentally, if you want to break through that wall, you'll need to do it with your head. If you have a chance to join a few of those first meetings as a spectator, do so. If not, well, honestly, those first meetings aren't that scary. Because once you realize you're not risking all that much, there really isn't all that much to fear. Sure, you can mess up, say something silly, but after a screw up, or 5, you'll learn and get better at it. Just go in well prepared, keep your cool, and don't promise anything you can't keep. And now a few words of wisdom. Money not made is not money lost. Also, there are more fish in the sea. Also, to paraphrase Churchill, don't worry about action, only about inaction. Also, George Bernard Shaw said, there is always danger for those who are afraid of it. You were listening to the North of Rapture podcast. This episode was made in association with NetGuru. If you have any comments, questions, or you just want to say hi, you can reach me at podcast@northofrapture.com. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram @northofrapture, all one word. Thanks for listening, until next time. And now if you'll excuse me, I need to return some videotapes.